When I woke up, my wife was gone. Not just out for coffee or an early errand. Gone in the kind of way that makes the house feel unfamiliar, like someone quietly removed the center of gravity while you were asleep. Her side of the bed was cold. Her phone charger was missing, and the closet door was slightly open. At first, I didn't panic. Melissa sometimes left early on Saturdays to pick up groceries before the crowds. We'd done that routine for years. I lay there for another minute, listening for the garage door or the sound of her moving around downstairs. Nothing. I got up, walked into the hallway, and noticed the silence felt wrong. Too still. Even the little things were off. The framed photo from our anniversary trip to Sedona was slightly crooked on the wall. Her shoes weren't by the entryway. The house smelled empty. Then I saw her wedding ring. It was sitting on the kitchen counter, next to the coffee maker. Melissa never took that ring off. Not when she cooked, not when she showered, not even when she slept. 12 years of marriage, and I'd seen her without it maybe twice. I picked it up, and for a second, I just stood there holding it in my palm, like it might explain something if I waited long enough. That's when my stomach tightened. I checked my phone. No messages. No missed calls. I texted her. "Hey, where'd you go?" I waited. The little delivered notification never appeared. That's when I opened the banking app. I don't know why I did that. Maybe it was instinct. Maybe it was the quiet. Maybe it was the ring sitting there like a full stop at the end of a sentence I didn't understand. Our savings account showed a balance of $312. I blinked, thinking it was a loading error. The night before, we had just over $84,000 in that account. 12 years of careful saving. Tax refunds, bonuses, skip vacations, overtime. Every extra dollar we could manage. I refreshed the screen. Still $312. Then I opened the transaction history. 3 transfers, all made at 2:14 a.m., each one draining the account in chunks. My hand started to shake, not dramatically, just enough that I had to set the phone down on the counter so I wouldn't drop it. I checked our joint checking account. Another $9,400 gone. I opened the credit card. 2 large charges I didn't recognize. Airline tickets. One way. I didn't sit down. I didn't shout. I just stood there in the kitchen, barefoot, staring at numbers that didn't belong to my life anymore. 12 years. Gone overnight. I tried calling her. Straight to voicemail. I tried again. Same thing. Then I walked back upstairs and opened her closet. Half of it was empty. Not messy. Not rushed. Just gone. Her suitcase was missing. The blue one we used for longer trips. A few hangers still swayed slightly, like the air hadn't fully settled yet. That detail hit me harder than anything else. She hadn't left in anger. She'd left quietly, carefully, planned. I sat on the edge of the bed then, finally, and looked around the room we'd shared for over a decade. The nightstand lamp, the stack of books she never finished, the faint indentation on her pillow. And for the first time, I realized I didn't know when she had decided to leave me, only that she had already been gone for a while. The bank confirmed the transfers were authorized with her login credentials. Since it was a joint account, there wasn't much they could do immediately. The representative spoke gently, like she'd had this conversation before. I thanked her, hung up, and stared at the wall. By noon, I had called her sister. No answer. By 2, I texted 2 of her closest friends. Nothing. By 5, the silence felt intentional. That was when it stopped feeling like confusion and started feeling like abandonment. By midnight, I stopped expecting her to walk back through the door. I slept on top of the covers, still half expecting to hear her keys in the lock. But the house stayed quiet, and sometime around 3 in the morning, I understood something I wasn't ready to say out loud yet. My wife hadn't just left. She had taken everything and disappeared. For months, I told myself I'd never see her again. I tried to accept that, tried to rebuild something from the space she left behind. Then, 6 months later, I walked into my new office building and saw her standing behind the reception desk, wearing a different last name, like I had never existed at all. Before that morning, I would have told you my marriage wasn't perfect, but it was solid. Melissa and I weren't dramatic people. No shouting matches. No big, emotional swings. We had built something quieter than that. Something steady. 12 years of shared routines, small compromises, and the kind of trust that forms slowly, without you noticing. We lived in a 2-story house in a quiet subdivision outside Columbus. Nothing fancy. Vinyl siding, small backyard, a maple tree that dropped leaves into the gutters every fall. We bought it 5 years after we got married, right when things started to feel stable. I handled operations for a regional logistics company. Not glamorous, but dependable. Melissa worked as a dental office coordinator. She was organized, calm, good with patience. The kind of person who remembered birthdays and sent thank you cards. We didn't have kids. That wasn't exactly planned. Life just kept moving. And then one day we realized we were in our late 30s and had grown used to the quiet. We talked about it sometimes, but never with urgency. Instead, we focused on building something else, financial stability. That's where the savings came in. Every bonus went into that account. Every tax refund. When my company offered overtime during the holiday rush, I took it. Melissa picked up extra shifts when someone at the office was out. We skipped expensive vacations, drove the same cars longer than most of our friends. It wasn't miserable. It was intentional. We had started talking about using the money for something bigger. Maybe a small investment property. Maybe upgrading to a better neighborhood. Maybe even Melissa starting her own dental billing service. Something she'd mentioned a few times over dinner. Looking back, that's when the first small shifts began. At first, it was subtle. Melissa started staying later at work. She said they were short-staffed. That made sense. Healthcare offices always seemed to run on thin margins. I didn't question it. Then she began taking calls outside. Not every time. Just often enough that I noticed. She'd step onto the back patio, close the sliding door, and talk quietly. When she came back inside, she'd smile, but the smile felt slightly delayed. Once, I asked who it was. Just work stuff, she said. I didn't push, because for 12 years, I had no reason to. Another small change. She became more focused on her phone. Not obsessively, just more private. She started flipping it face down when she set it on the counter. She added a passcode she hadn't used before. Again, none of this screamed betrayal. People change. Work gets stressful. Life gets complicated. But there was one moment that stuck with me later. About a month before she left, we were sitting at the kitchen table going over our finances, something we did every few months. I had the laptop open, and we were reviewing the savings account, $84,000. We both sat there quietly for a second, letting that number sink in. We actually did it, she said softly. Almost, I replied. Couple more months and we're there. She nodded, but her expression looked distant. Not proud, not excited, just thoughtful. Then she asked, "Do you ever think about starting over somewhere else?" It wasn't a normal question for her. Starting over? I said, yeah, different city, different life. I remember leaning back in the chair, trying to read her tone. I mean, maybe someday, I said. Why? She shrugged. Just thinking. That was it. The conversation moved on. We talked about grocery budgets and insurance renewals. Normal things. The moment passed. But now, looking back, I realized she wasn't talking about someday. She was already planning. Another thing I missed. She started sorting through things. Closets. Drawers. Old paperwork. She told me she was decluttering. That seemed reasonable. We'd lived there long enough to accumulate junk. Boxes started appearing in the garage. Some went to donation. Some disappeared. I never tracked what left. One evening, I noticed the old photo albums were gone from the hallway closet. Did you move those? I asked. Yeah, she said. Packed them away. I didn't think about it again. The week before she left, she seemed calmer. Not happier. Just calm. She cooked dinner twice that week, which she hadn't done much lately. We watched a movie on Thursday night. She leaned her head on my shoulder halfway through, something she hadn't done in months. At the time, I thought maybe the stressful period at work had passed. Maybe things were returning to normal. Friday night, the night before she left, we sat on the back patio. It was warm, late spring. The neighborhood was quiet. Someone down the street was grilling, and the smell drifted over the fence. She asked if I wanted another beer. I said sure. She handed it to me and sat down across from me, watching me for a second like she was memorizing something. "You ever think about how fast time moves?" she asked. "Sometimes," I said. "Why?" She shrugged again. "Just feels like we blinked and 12 years went by." I smiled. "Not the worst 12 years." She smiled back, but it was a soft smile, almost sad. Later that night, we went to bed like we always did. No argument, no tension, nothing unusual. She fell asleep before I did. I remember turning off the lamp and hearing her breathing steady beside me. That was the last normal moment I can clearly remember, because sometime around 2 in the morning, while I was asleep, Melissa transferred 12 years of our life into another account, packed the rest of her things, took the blue suitcase from the closet, and walked out of the house without saying goodbye. The next morning, all that remained was the ring on the counter and a silence that felt carefully planned. At the time, I thought the worst part was the money. I didn't realize yet that the money was only the beginning. The first 2 days after Melissa left felt unreal. I moved through the house like I was borrowing someone else's life. I made coffee out of habit. I turned on the TV for background noise. I checked my phone every few minutes, even though nothing changed. But by the third day, the shock started giving way to something else. Questions. The bank had already told me the transfers were authorized using her login credentials. Since it was a joint account, there wasn't much they could reverse. Still, I scheduled an in-person appointment at the branch Monday morning, hoping someone might see something I had missed. The banker, a middle-aged woman named Carol, pulled up the account history on her monitor. "These were scheduled transfers," she said gently. "Scheduled?" I asked. She nodded. "They weren't random. They were set up ahead of time." That detail landed differently. "You mean she planned them?" Carol hesitated, then nodded again. "Yes, it looks like these were prepared at least a few days before they executed." I stared at the screen. Melissa hadn't just decided in the middle of the night. She had prepared the exit. Carol printed the transaction records for me. 3 transfers, all routed to the same external account. A bank I didn't recognize. The receiving account was listed under a name I'd never seen before. M. Carter. I looked at Carol. "That's not her name." "Is it possibly a new account?" she asked. She didn't tell me anything. Carol didn't say what we were both thinking. But the idea settled quietly into place. Melissa didn't just move the money. She moved it somewhere deliberate. I drove home slowly. The printouts sitting on the passenger seat. Every red light felt longer than usual. My mind kept replaying the last month, searching for moments that might explain the name. M. Carter. Melissa's maiden name wasn't Carter. No one in her family had that last name. It wasn't a friend I recognized. By the time I got home, my confusion had shifted into something sharper. I opened her desk drawer in the spare bedroom, the small home office she used for occasional paperwork. I wasn't searching for anything specific. I just needed something to make sense. The drawer was mostly empty. Not messy, just cleared. That detail again. Planned. But in the back corner, tucked underneath a stack of blank envelopes, I found something. A receipt, printed from a shipping store. 2 weeks before she left. Destination, Phoenix, Arizona. I frowned. Melissa didn't know anyone in Phoenix. Neither did I. The package weight was listed as 28 pounds. That wasn't documents. That was belongings. I sat down in the chair slowly. So she had shipped something ahead of time. That meant she wasn't just running. She was relocating. I checked the closet again. More carefully this time. Clothes missing, yes. But also smaller things I hadn't noticed before. Jewelry pieces, shoes. Her laptop. Some of her winter clothes, even though it was spring. She wasn't leaving temporarily. She was moving her life. That afternoon, I checked the credit card statement again. The airline tickets. I looked closer at the details. 2 one-way tickets. Columbus to Phoenix. One purchased 3 days before she left. The second purchased the same night. My chest tightened. 2 tickets. Not one. I stared at the screen for a long time. That was the first moment I seriously considered that Melissa hadn't left alone. I leaned back in the chair and tried to slow my breathing. I didn't want to jump to conclusions. There could be explanations. Maybe she bought 2 seats for space. Maybe she changed flights. But deep down, I already knew. Melissa had planned this with someone. That thought changed everything. Because leaving was one thing. Planning a new life with someone else, that was something entirely different. I checked her email. We shared access to one of our old joint accounts. She hadn't used it much recently, but I logged in anyway. Most of the recent messages were mundane: store promotions, dental office scheduling emails, newsletters. But then I noticed something strange. A password reset confirmation for a different email address, one I didn't recognize. The confirmation had been forwarded accidentally to the shared account. The new address used her first name and the last name Carter. My hands felt cold. Melissa Carter. She hadn't just transferred the money to that name. She was using it, creating a new identity. I sat there staring at the screen, feeling something shift inside me. Not anger yet, not even sadness. Just a slow realization that I had missed far more than I understood. Later that evening, I called her sister again. This time, she answered. "Hey, Daniel," she said, sounding cautious. "You heard from Melissa?" I asked. There was a pause. "Not really," she said. "Not really." That phrasing stuck. What does that mean? She just said she needed some space. When? Couple weeks ago. My grip tightened on the phone. She told you weeks ago. She didn't give details. Her sister said quickly. Just said she was figuring things out. I nodded slowly, even though she couldn't see me. So you knew she might leave. I didn't know she was taking money, Daniel. Her voice sounded defensive now. I just thought. I don't know. I thought she was stressed. I ended the call politely, but the damage was done. Melissa hadn't just planned this alone. She had been telling people, preparing, building a life outside of the one we shared. That night, I sat at the kitchen table with the printed bank records, the shipping receipt, and my phone open to the airline tickets. 3 pieces of evidence, each one quiet, each one deliberate, each one pointing to the same conclusion. Melissa didn't wake up one morning and decide to leave. She had been leaving me, slowly, for weeks, maybe months, and I had been sitting across from her at dinner, talking about grocery budgets and weekend plans, completely unaware that the life I thought we were building together was already being dismantled. By the end of that week, I stopped waiting for Melissa to call. Instead, I started trying to understand the version of her that had quietly built a second life right in front of me. The name Melissa Carter kept circling in my mind, so I did something I hadn't done before. I searched it. At first, nothing meaningful came up. Too common. Too many results. But then I narrowed it down. Phoenix. Recent. Social media. And that's when I found the profile. It wasn't hard to recognize her. She had cut her hair shorter, just above her shoulders, and the lighting in the photo was brighter than anything she normally posted. But it was still Melissa. Same eyes. Same faint smile. Same person who had slept beside me a week earlier. Except now, the profile name read Melissa Carter. My chest tightened as I clicked through. The account wasn't completely new. A few posts stretched back about a month. Nothing dramatic. A photo of a sunset. A picture of a coffee shop. A caption about fresh starts. Fresh starts. I kept scrolling. Then I saw the first photo that made my stomach drop. Melissa standing next to a man. He looked mid-40s, maybe. Clean cut. Casual button-down shirt. They were standing outside what looked like an apartment complex. The caption read, "New chapter." No tagging. No names. But the way they were standing, slightly angled toward each other, comfortable, told me everything I needed to know. I leaned back in my chair slowly, the room feeling smaller. Melissa hadn't just left. She had already arrived somewhere else. And she hadn't arrived alone. For a few minutes, I just stared at the screen, trying to process how long this must have been building. The calm conversations, the late-night calls, the decluttering, the shipping receipt. Every small moment rearranged itself into something clearer. I checked the date on the photo. 3 days after she left. 3 days. Which meant she didn't just move there. She already had somewhere to go. Already had someone waiting. I closed the laptop and sat there, staring at the wall across the kitchen. The silence felt heavier now, less confusing, more final. For the first time, anger surfaced. Not explosive, not loud, just a slow, steady heat. Because she hadn't just left me. She had let me sit across from her for weeks, knowing she was building another life. Later that night, I reopened the banking documents Carol had printed. The receiving account. M. Carter. I looked more closely this time. There was a partial account number, and the receiving bank listed as a regional credit union in Arizona. That matched. She hadn't moved the money randomly. She had already set up the account where she was going, which meant she probably opened it before she left, possibly before she even told her sister. I decided to call the credit union the next morning. I didn't expect them to tell me much, but I wanted confirmation that the account existed. After a few transfers, I reached someone in their customer service department. I explained that funds from a joint account had been transferred to an account under the name Melissa Carter and asked if they could confirm the deposit. They couldn't disclose details, but the representative did confirm something small. Yes, the transfer was received successfully. That was enough. The money was gone. Not floating in transit. Not pending. Gone. I thanked her and hung up. That was the moment the situation stopped feeling reversible. Until then, some part of me still imagined Melissa calling, apologizing, explaining something I couldn't yet see. But now, she had the money, the new name, the new city, and the new life. She hadn't left in confusion. She had left in certainty. That afternoon, I went back upstairs and opened the nightstand drawer on her side of the bed. I wasn't even sure what I was looking for anymore. Inside, there were only a few things left. An old paperback, a hair tie, and a folded piece of paper tucked in the back corner. I unfolded it slowly. It was a printed email. A lease agreement. Phoenix, Arizona. 1-bedroom apartment. Start date. 3 days before she left. Tenant name, Melissa Carter. My hands felt numb as I read it. She had signed the lease before she transferred the money. Before she walked out. Before we sat on the patio, talking about how fast 12 years had gone. That meant she had already secured the apartment, while still sleeping beside me every night. That realization hit harder than anything else. Not the money. Not the other man. The timing. She had already left emotionally, while I was still living inside the marriage. I sat down on the bed, the paper still in my hands, and for the first time since she disappeared, the silence didn't just feel empty. It felt deliberate, calculated. Every small moment of the last month replayed differently now. Her calmness, her thoughtful expressions, the way she looked at me on the patio. She wasn't thinking about our future. She was saying goodbye, quietly, without telling me. And the hardest part wasn't even the betrayal. It was realizing that I had been the only one still living in the marriage. Melissa had already walked away. The night she transferred the money was just the moment I finally caught up. The meeting was scheduled for 9 a.m. in one of the smaller conference rooms on the 3rd floor. By 8:52, I was already seated. My attorney, Robert Klein, sat beside me, flipping quietly through a thin folder. Across the table sat Julia from HR, along with the company's internal compliance officer, a man named Darren Holt who looked like he had spent his entire career dealing with uncomfortable situations. The chair across from me was still empty. At 8:59, the door opened. Melissa walked in. For a brief second, she froze when she saw me sitting there with a lawyer. Then she recovered quickly and stepped inside, closing the door behind her. She looked composed, but I could see it. The tightness around her eyes, the slight hesitation in her movements. She had expected a private conversation. Not this. Melissa, Julia began gently. Thank you for coming. Please have a seat. Melissa sat down slowly, placing her hands together on the table. What's this about? She asked. Darren leaned forward slightly. This is a formal review regarding employment documentation and potential policy violations. Melissa nodded, calm but cautious. Okay. Robert slid a single sheet of paper across the table. This is a copy of the identity information you submitted during hiring, he said. Melissa glanced at it. Yes. And this, he continued, sliding a second document forward, is a certified copy of your previous legal identification. Her fingers tightened slightly. Why are we doing this? She asked. Julia answered softly. We've received information suggesting discrepancies. Melissa looked at me then, not angry, not defensive, just calculating. You brought this? She asked quietly. I confirmed it, I replied. Darren spoke next. When you were hired, you listed your legal name as Melissa Carter. However, documentation suggests that name change was never legally processed. Melissa didn't respond immediately. She looked down at the table, then back up. I was planning to file it, she said. Darren nodded. Additionally, your employment paperwork indicates you had no prior marital financial entanglements. That appears to be inaccurate. Now Melissa shifted slightly in her chair. This feels unnecessary, she said carefully. People separate. People start over. Yes, Darren replied calmly, but falsifying employment documentation is different. Robert then opened the folder. And there's also the matter of financial overlap, he added. Melissa's eyes moved to him. Robert continued. Funds transferred into the Carter account originated from a joint marital account, still under legal dispute. That creates potential exposure if any company-related financial transactions occurred during that time. That was the moment the calm began to crack. Melissa leaned back slightly. I didn't do anything illegal, she said. No one's accusing you of criminal activity at this point, Darren replied. But these discrepancies require review. Julia spoke gently but firmly. Melissa, until this is resolved, we're placing you on administrative leave. The words hung in the room. Administrative leave. Melissa's composure finally slipped. You're suspending me? She asked. Temporarily, Julia said. Pending documentation review. Melissa looked at me again. This time, there was no calculation. Just disbelief. You did this, she said quietly. I didn't answer immediately. Then I said, you created this. The room stayed quiet. Melissa looked down at the table again, breathing slowly, like she was trying to regain control. But the shift had already happened. For the first time since she walked out of our house, she wasn't the one directing events. Darren gathered the documents. Melissa, HR will follow up with next steps. For now, we'll need your badge. She hesitated. That small pause said everything. Then she unclipped the badge from her blouse and placed it on the table. The plastic hit the surface softly. Julia slid it toward her. Security will escort you to collect your personal items. Melissa nodded slowly. She stood. For a second, it looked like she might say something else. Instead, she walked toward the door. Then she stopped, turned slightly, and said quietly, You didn't have to do this. I met her eyes. You didn't have to leave the way you did. She held my gaze for a second longer. Then she walked out. The door closed gently behind her. No shouting, no drama, just a quiet ending to something that had started quietly 6 months earlier. I exhaled slowly. Robert leaned back slightly beside me. You handled that well, he said. But I didn't feel victorious. I didn't feel relieved. I just felt settled. Because for the first time since that morning when I woke up to an empty house, something had finally balanced. Melissa had walked away believing she controlled the narrative. New name, new city, new life. But the truth followed her. Not loudly, not dramatically, just steadily. And by the time she realized it, the life she had built on that quiet exit was already beginning to unravel. I didn't see Melissa again after that morning. Not in the lobby. Not in the parking garage. Not even in passing. Within a week, her name disappeared from the internal directory. 2 weeks later, her desk at reception was cleared. A new hire replaced her, and the building returned to its usual rhythm, like she had never been there, just like she had tried to do to me. Robert later told me she submitted a short response through HR, claiming she had intended to formalize everything properly, but never provided the requested documentation. Without verification, the company moved forward with termination. Quiet, administrative, final, no announcement, no confrontation, just a clean ending. I didn't ask what happened after that. I didn't check social media again. I didn't try to follow her life. For the first time in months, I didn't feel the need to know, because something had shifted inside me. The money was still gone. That part didn't magically fix itself. My attorney explained that recovering it would likely take a long legal process, and even then, there were no guarantees. Melissa had moved it across accounts, and unless we pursued full litigation, it might cost nearly as much to fight as we could recover. So I made a decision that surprised even me. I let it go. Not because it didn't matter, but because I realized something else mattered more, rebuilding a life that wasn't tied to what she had taken. The new job helped. The company was stable, the work was steady, and for the first time in years, I wasn't just maintaining something. I was building again. Small things at first, paying down the remaining debts, rebuilding savings, learning to sit in my own house without feeling like it belonged to someone else. I sold the old place 3 months later, not because I had to financially, but because every room carried too much memory. The kitchen counter, the empty closet, the patio where we talked about 12 years going by. I moved into a smaller townhouse closer to work. 2 bedrooms, quiet street, no maple tree dropping leaves into the gutters. It felt different. Not better at first, just new. 6 months after Melissa's termination, I realized something I hadn't expected. I wasn't thinking about her every day anymore. Sometimes a week would pass. Then 2. The anger faded first. Then the confusion. Then the constant replaying of small moments, trying to figure out where things changed. Eventually, what remained wasn't bitterness, just clarity. I had trusted someone completely, and she had used that trust as an exit strategy. But I also realized something else. I had survived it. Not dramatically, not heroically, just quietly. I rebuilt my finances. I rebuilt my routines. I rebuilt my sense of control. About a year after everything happened, I took my first real vacation alone. Nothing extravagant. Just a week in Colorado, renting a small cabin outside Boulder. I spent mornings hiking and evenings sitting on a wooden porch watching the light fade over the mountains. One night, sitting there with a cup of coffee, I realized something simple. For the first time in a long time, I felt peaceful. Not happy in a loud, triumphant way. Just steady. The kind of steady I thought I had before. But this time, it belonged entirely to me. Melissa had taken 12 years of savings. She had taken the version of my life I thought I understood. But she hadn't taken my ability to rebuild. And in the end, that mattered more than anything she walked away with. Sometimes I still think about that morning. The cold side of the bed, the ring on the counter, the empty account. But now, it feels less like the end of something, and more like the moment my life split into 2 parts. Before I understood how fragile things can be, and after I learned how strong quiet rebuilding really is. If you've ever had someone walk away without warning, if you've ever had your life rearranged overnight, you probably understand something I didn't back then. The worst loss isn't always what disappears. It's believing you won't recover. And then, slowly, realizing you already are. If this story resonated with you, or if you've gone through something similar, I'd be interested to hear how you handled it. These quiet rebuilds don't always look dramatic, but they're often the strongest ones. And if you want to hear more stories like this, real moments, real betrayals, and the slow return to control, consider subscribing and staying with me for the next one. Because sometimes the loudest victories are the ones no one else ever sees.